Hello, my name is Dr. Joel Klenck, an archaeologist. I'm trying to prevent a cultural atrocity, the total destruction of Noah's Ark by decomposition, basically rotting due to a melting glacier and permafrost and the continual looting of the site. The Ark is so large that it is almost impossible to conceal, but it was concealed by nationalism, ethnic hatred, and greed, and other factors. Also, the only area where the Ark could rest and Noah's family and the animals of the Ark could peacefully descend is on the southern side of Mount Ararat. Louis Binford, a prominent archaeologist, argued there is never a one-to-one correlation between a cultural account and an archaeological site. With Noah's Ark, he is mistaken. There are several Noah's Ark accounts. First in Genesis describes as the most comprehensive description. Here, the world was destroyed because of the sin of the descendants of Adam. There was a global flood. Before this, God selected a man named Noah, a righteous man, perfect in his generations. And his three sons helped him build the ark and to store 2 of every kind of terrestrial animal that was unclean and 7 of every kind of animal that was clean. The specifics of the ark are noted in the book of Genesis, and we're just going to go through them very quickly, but all of them apply to Noah's Ark. It was made of gopher wood in Genesis 6:14. Now, several have translated this as being part of cuparison, perhaps related to the Latin cupressus, representing cypress. Others have said that gopher represents the Hebrew word for pitch. In either case, both are correct. The site is made of cypress wood, and it's covered on the inside and outside with pitch. Also in Genesis 6:14, they say to make rooms, or God told Noah and his sons to make rooms in it. And there's all sorts of rooms, from very large rooms with heavy wood beams to small cages. Also, Noah and his sons were instructed to coat the exterior and the interior of the structure with pitch. This was in Genesis 6:14. And the site is covered on the exterior and also on the interior with bitumen or resinous material. Bitumen made from a petroleum base, resin made from a plant base. It's all over the exterior and interior of Noah's Ark. Also, the site was huge, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. And this is in Genesis 6:15. Also, Noah was told to make a roof, and under the roof build an opening 1 cubit high all around. And in the site of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, you have exactly that. Also, Noah was told to put a door on the side of the ark, and that's exactly what you find. Also, Noah was told to make lower, middle, and upper decks. And at this structure, there are three floors or 3 decks. Now, God told Noah he was going to destroy all life that has breath in it, terrestrial life, basically terrestrial life. And he was told, Noah was told to take every kind of food that is to be eaten for all the animals and store it away as food for you and them. And this was in Genesis 6:21. And here we have huge cargo holds that were filled with, that were once filled, and there's still a platform or a matting of lots of different types of seeds from the early Neolithic. So we have lots of cicer or chickpeas, so many seeds of peas. We have also bitter vetch, as well as different types of grains, pre-domesticates of rye, wheat, and barley. Noah did everything just as God commanded him in Genesis 6:22. And that is correct because there is a huge maritime barge on Mount Ararat. And when the ark was finished, pairs of unclean and clean animals came to Noah and entered into the ark. And then after the global flood, the ark came to rest. And this is a very important verse. Came to rest on the mountains of Ararat in Genesis 8:4. And then after the flood water subsided, all the animals came out of the ark, one kind after another, in Genesis 8:19. Now Noah then planted a vineyard, made wine, and became drunk in Genesis 9:21. And there are a lot of artifacts, which is interesting, from this site that are made with vitis, or the genus that comprises grapes. Now the Quran also has several very interesting verses. First in Surah 11:40, Nu, which is the Arabic translation of Noah, it was to take into the ark two of all things. Also, Surah 11:41 states that God was forgiving and merciful. And Surah 11:44 says the ark rested on Judi, or specifically Al-Judi, which means in Arabic, translated in Arabic, means the high place or the highest. And you're going to see how important that is in our discussion of Noah's Ark. And then in Surah 11:48, Noah and the animals are to descend with peace. And that's a very important statement when we're analyzing the location of Noah's Ark. And then finally in Surah 29:15, Noah and the inmates of the ark, appropriately named, were delivered from the flood, and that was to be the sign to the worlds. So the first major observation is that the size of Noah's Ark was monumental. And you'll see how true that statement was. It was very large, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits in width, 30 cubits in height. That's from Genesis 6:15. Now the ancient cubit was differently measured, and it was supposed to be from the elbow to the tip of the fingers. And it fluctuated between 17 and 23 inches, or in centimeters between 43.18 and 58.42 centimeters, a difference of 6 inches or about 15 centimeters. So the length of the ark was to be between 129 and 176 meters in length, the width between 21 and 30 meters, and the height between 13 meters and 18 meters. Just an enormous structure. Now here is a map showing Greater Mount Ararat, or Ağrı Dağı. The size of the ark for comparison is noted near the village of Eli. Now this is not the location of the ark, but this is just for comparison purposes, to see how large, and it's surrounded by a red circle, to see how large the ark is. And Eli is also very important in the concealment of the ark and the removal of its artifacts. Now, several points. Noah's Ark is so large, it's almost impossible to hide except with a coordinated effort to conceal or misdirect people looking for the ark. Archaeologists find much smaller features, such as burials, habitations, compared to Noah's Ark. Think of it, a post mold. And any archaeologist that systematically researched Noah's Ark would be able to find it. The second major observation is that Greater Mount Ararat is dangerous on all sides except the southern side. Now for Lesser Mount Ararat, it's dangerous on all sides. And let's review the description of Noah's Ark. In Genesis 8:4, it said, after the global flood, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Rest. And that after the flood water subsided, all the animals came out of the ark, one kind after another. Now Surah 11:41 states that God is forgiving and merciful. And Surah 11:44 states, the ark rested on Al-Judi, or the high place, or the highest. Now Surah 11:48 says, Nu and the animals are to descend with peace. That's a very important statement. And then Surah 29:15 says, Noah and the inmates of the ark were delivered from the flood that was to be a sign to the worlds in the future. Now Genesis mentions this somewhat. God's command, be fruitful and multiply on the earth and increase upon it. And lastly, in Genesis 9:17, we read, there was a covenant established between God and all life on earth. Only one side for Noah and the animals on the ark was possible. And only on the southern aspect of Mount Ararat, so the animals could descend with peace. The northern, western, and eastern sides of Mount Ararat are incredibly steep, showing sheer cliffs, and are extremely hazardous. Here's a topographic map. And just a little primer, when the lines are close together, this means it's very steep. When the lines are farther apart, the slope is very gradual. Here it shows that the western, northern, and eastern sides of Greater Mount Ararat are very steep. And also all around Lesser Mount Ararat, the sides are very steep. Let me give you some photographic examples. Here is a view of Mount Ararat, Greater Mount Ararat, from the northeast. Just look how terrible and treacherous it is. Very steep. So steep that the ice can't even cling onto the rocks because it's just a sheer drop. Here's the northwestern view of Ağrı Dağı, or Greater Mount Ararat. Again, terribly steep drops, sheer cliffs. Here's a western view. Now, in the western view, you have the plateau, but outside the plateau and surrounding the plateau, the western plateau, are terrible cliffs where anyone trying to descend in this area would plunge to their death. And also, it was very hard to get out of this area. No matter where you go, you're either a stiff climb up or going around or going down on any side of this western plateau is a sheer drop and incredibly dangerous. Now, here I've shown you a southern view of Mount Ararat, or Greater Mount Ararat, specifically the Gorge, the southern gorge. The only area that shows gradual descents is on the southern side of Mount Ararat. And the easiest area to descend is in the southern gorge. Here's a satellite map of the southern side of Mount Ararat and the southern gorge, and there's a red dot in the middle of it to help you identify it. Several points. The floor of the gorge has small blocky particles of glacial scree that are similar to sand and would have been caused either by a flood or a glaciation. Now, if you fall down, you will not get hurt. It's easy to go down, but very hard to go up. It's kind of like climbing up or down a sand dune. And once you have descended the gorge, you move to the southwest and the terrain is very gentle and easy. So here's a topographic map again. You can see how gradual the slopes are on the southern side of Mount Ararat compared to the western, northern, and eastern sides, and all around Lesser Mount Ararat. The only peaceful descents are on the southern side of Ağrı Dağı. Further, it is only on the southern side of Mount Ararat that Noah's Ark could rest, where there is enough space and such a gentle slope for the ark to rest. And remember, it says in Genesis 8:4, after the global flood, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. the ark rested in Surah 1144. The slopes are too steep and the areas are too narrow for the ark to rest on the western, northern, or eastern sides of Mount Ararat and all around Lesser Mount Ararat. You can see how there's enough room on the topographic map for Noah's Ark to rest on the southern side of the mountain compared to the western, northern, and eastern sides where the steep climb would cause the Ark to plunge downward. There would be no resting for the Ark. Also, the only peaceful descents and gentle slopes for the Ark to rest are on the southern side of Ağrı Dağı. And when you see the location of Noah's Ark and the areas where the Ark settled, you will see truly that the Ark rested. And where it rested on the southern side of Mount Ararat in the southern gorge.